I'm Barry Bridges, a reporter with Lawyers Weekly, joining you as part of our Sidebar Conference video series, where we discuss topics of interest to the bench and bar. Today, I thought we'd talk a bit about the Trump administration's recent order authorizing employers to defer payroll taxes for the remainder of the year. And joining me to tell us more about that is Russell Stein, a tax attorney with Partridge, Snow and Hahn in Boston, who advises both businesses and nonprofits. Russell, welcome and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Barry. I'm glad to be here.
So we see many references to this program actually as deferring payroll taxes, but in reality, it may be more fairly described as a Social Security tax deferral. Is that correct to say?
Yeah, that's more accurate. When the president first announced it on August 8th, there weren't that many guidelines. And then the IRS came out with some regulations on Friday, August 28th, that basically said you look at the Social Security or FICA taxes that the employee pays, and there's the option to defer payment of those taxes until January. So anyone who has a paycheck has seen there's an alphabet soup of withholdings and taxes on the paycheck. There's the income tax withholding, which is the bulk of it, but there's also Social Security, which is also called FICA taxes, which is approximately 6.2% withholding. There's Medicare withholding, there's state withholding, there's unemployment tax withholding, and so on and so forth. The president's order and the Treasury regulations just affect one of those taxes, the 6.2% Social Security withholding on the employee's wages.
Thank you, Russell. Tell us a bit about the mechanics. How does it work? Who qualifies? And perhaps most importantly, from the employee perspective, I suppose, is how and when are the deferred taxes repaid to the government?
Yeah. Basically, any private company, as well as the federal government as an employer, qualifies for this. There's no size limit. So from companies from 1 or 2 employees to hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of employees can qualify. The way it works is starting with payrolls starting September 1st and ending December 31st of this calendar year. At the employer's option, the employer can stop withholding the 6.2% FICA taxes on certain eligible employees. The eligible employees are anyone who's making less than $4,000 per biweekly payroll. So that's basically anyone with an annual salary of under $104,000 a year is eligible for this program. So if an employer opts into the program, then the employer can stop withholding that 6.2% on the wages from now until December. And then starting January 1st, 2021, the amount that was not withheld for the remainder of 2020 has to be ratably withheld from the employee's paycheck from January through April 30th of 2002. So basically what it's doing is it's shifting the taxes that are being paid over the next 4 months from now until January through April, giving the employees additional take-home pay for this 4-month period.
So you said that the deferral is at the employer's option. From your perspective as an attorney who advises businesses, what kind of things should an employer consider when deciding whether to implement the program, and what are the problems or potential drawbacks?
There's not that much guidance. The IRS guidance was basically 3 pages. It came out on a Friday night, and it doesn't provide that much really backup for the employers, other than saying that they can do it other than saying the 3 things that basically I mentioned. It's for employees who have under $4,000 employees under $4,000 in biweekly payroll. It's at the employer's option, and then they have to repay it in January. So there's a lot of payroll issues that companies have to consider when looking into this. First, depending on the size of the employer, it can be quite expensive to actually implement it because you have to go through your payroll program and figure out which employees are eligible for this, and then somehow tell your payroll company to stop withholding on those employees' paychecks for that 6.2%. Then come January, you basically need to turn it back on and in effect double up on the withholding. So not only in January would you have to do the normal withholding, but you would have to do all the withholding that should have been withheld over the next 4 months into January. So that may be a significant administrative burden depending on the size of the company to make sure it's all done correctly. The other important issue that the employers need to realize is the technical way the regulation works is it just changes the withholding payment date. So generally withholding is remitted to the government monthly. It's withheld from employees' paychecks on the weekly or the bi-weekly paycheck. What the rules do is it changes the due date to the requirement to withhold until January from now. So it doesn't relieve the employers or the employees of paying those taxes. So the employer is still responsible for paying those taxes. And one of the primary issues the employer needs to consider is what happens if the employee leaves. If you opt into the program and you defer those taxes from the employee, and the employee leaves before April 30th, 2021, the employer is still responsible for paying those taxes. And the government, the Treasury regulations do not provide any guidance on how the employer can collect those taxes other than a broad statement saying the employer should make some sort of arrangement with the employees to make sure the taxes are collected. So the taxes are still due. It's just a matter of how you're going to collect them and from whom. But ultimately, the employer, under the current regulations, is still responsible for paying 100% of those taxes to the government when it becomes due.
In your knowledge, do we have any precedent for this on how to proceed? Have there been programs like this before? Is this something unique that we've never seen before?
There have been similar programs. The government is always trying to get more money into the pockets of workers without actually changing taxes. So we have seen in the past the government changing the withholding tax tables. Now, that relates to the income tax withholding side and not the Social Security tax withholding side. But the effect is sort of the same. They require less upfront withholding, and then they make it up when the employee does the annual April 15th 1040 filing. They pay it later. For Social Security taxes, I'm not aware of a similar deferral on the employer portion. There is a provision in the CARES Act that came into effect in March and April that relates to the employer's portion. It's called the Employee Retention Tax Credit. So while it doesn't say the employer no longer has to withhold from the employee, it does give the employer up to $10,000 credit against the employer portion of that 6.2% Social Security taxes. But I do not recall any other provision where they've said the employee does not have to pay the Social Security taxes. And one thing to remember, the Social Security taxes, the intent of that is to basically fund the Social Security system. So when someone pays into the system, they get a credit in the system that's supposed to be used to calculate how much Social Security payments they will get when they retire. If the taxes are not paid, and if by some chance the taxes are ultimately excluded, then that amount of taxes are going to be taken out of the calculations for Social Security taxes. So it may be a short-term benefit to employees, but there could be some long-term consequences to doing it as well.
Considering that impact on perhaps an employee's future Social Security benefits, can an employee opt out if his or her employer chooses to participate?
Yeah, currently there's no mechanism to have an employer either opt in or for an employee to opt out. Sorry, I think I said employee. The employee, this is all employer driven. The regulations say the employer may participate in this program. There's no guidance on whether an employer, if they do participate, has to do it for every eligible employee or can do it at the option of the employee. And on the other side, there's no ability for an employee to say, I don't want to participate. I want you to continue to withhold the Social Security taxes. In fact, for federal employees, there's currently a mandate that all federal agencies have to participate in this program. So all federal agencies are deferring collecting the Social Security taxes to give the employees more take-home pay in this short period. I have read news reports that certain federal employee unions are protesting that and trying to create some sort of opt-out provision. I have no idea whether that's going to be successful, but as of now, employees really don't have any say in the matter.
Is there anything else that employees need to keep in mind with this or to be aware of?
Yeah, the main thing is to realize that as of the current law, it's really just a deferral. So an example is an employee making $60,000 a year has about $73 withheld from his paycheck, his or her paycheck, every pay period. So over the 4 months of this program, if they end up participating in the program, about $1,300 is not going to be withheld. So the employee will have $1,300 more in cash to spend however they want over the next 4 months. But come January, that $1,300 is going to be taken out of their paycheck from January through April. So while they have more cash now, because of the double withholding in January through April, they're going to have less cash in the first quarter of 2021. Now, there's always the possibility that the deferral will turn into an exclusion and exemption. But the way the tax code and the tax regulations work is while the IRS can issue a regulation deferring payment of these taxes, the IRS cannot issue a regulation saying you no longer have to pay those taxes. That can only come from a change of the code, which can only come from congressional action. So in order for this deferral to be turned into an exclusion, you'd have to have Congress and the president agree on legislation that will change the tax code. Whether or not that is likely is anyone's guess.
And it does seem the IRS is issuing regulations fairly often with this. Like this morning, I saw that, as you said, federal civil employees will be subject to this. But right now, what are the big unknowns, Russell? Or is there anything, are there gaping gaps here that we need to fill in somehow?
Yeah, the largest unknown is what to do when an employee leaves. Are you allowed to deduct that entire amount that was deferred from their final paycheck? Is there some other way that the IRS will collect the amount from the employee, such as through the 1041 filing or the Form 1040 filing in April 15th? Or is there some other mechanism that will shift the responsibility away from the employer and onto the employee? So the biggest unknown is what to do with an employee who leaves. So a lot of people are hopeful that the IRS will issue some additional guidance in that manner. The other large issue is the whole issue that we were talking about opting in and opting out. Whether the government is going to issue any regulations on that or just leave it completely up to the company to figure out whether or not to participate, and if they are going to participate, how much they should participate in it, how many employees they should enroll in this type of program.
Okay, with that, Russell, we'll wrap it up. I certainly appreciate your expertise with this.
Okay, thank you very much for having me, Barry.